Thank you very much. Now we have time to discuss, to comment the papers of this beautiful and rich morning. Is there any question? Okay. Professor Nuno Simões Rodrigues.
Thank you for all the colleagues in the panel. I just would like to add a detail to Lorenzo's paper presentation. I am sorry to disappoint Egyptologists, but the plot of Aida is in fact Greek. The main story of Aida is based on a 4th century novel by Heliodorus called Aethiopica, where we find the story of an Ethiopian princess in love with the Egyptian prince or Egyptian general. In fact, before the findings of Carter, many things were based on Greek sources, as all of you know, starting with Herodotus, of course. And the plot of Aida is, in fact, a Greek plot, but just a detail. Thank you.
Hi, my question is for Jasmine. As an anthropologist, I want to ask you, how did you not come up with cultural appropriation and the abstraction of certain details from its original cultural production context and then reappropriating it and redefining its meaning in, for example, your jewellery?
Yes, one of the difficulties in dealing with this subject in only 20 minutes is that there are things like that which could be explored perhaps at greater length, and there wasn't time insofar as I simply wanted to showcase the fact that we had together worked out what the dates of some of this jewellery were and that it could be related specifically to Tutankhamun. But I do have long-term plans to write on this, possibly a book on this Egyptian revival jewellery. We see only books about Egyptian revival in general and particularly in fine arts. They don't always talk about this issue of cultural appropriation. They mostly focus on the fine arts and particularly painting and things like that. And they might occasionally have a piece of jewellery. I'd like to produce a book that has a lot of jewellery in it, not the famous obvious stuff like Lalique or Cartier, but some of this sort of upper middle class jewellery that was much more common. I touched upon the hieroglyphs as something that potentially you could say more about. The way that it is treated very superficially. There's a whole history of the way that hieroglyphs were not understood initially by Europeans, and there was a tremendous lag after Champollion's discovery in Europe. There was a tremendous lag before the general public started to understand these things, or understand that it really was a language, and people in making jewellery and particularly things like fabric design as well, I notice, or wrapping paper design, notorious for taking Egyptian art out of context, taking hieroglyphs out of context and using, as I said, alphabet soup hieroglyphs. So it's really something that I can't say as much about at this stage, simply because I recognise that it's an issue that needs further exploration beyond just this paper, which barely scratches the surface. Yes, it is something to be discussed. And, one of the questions I have is why were certain Egyptian motifs selected and decontextualised and recontextualised as they were. One of the things I didn't mention in the paper was I have a huge collection of cabochons, which I've had decided to store and box up in groups. I thought, here's a chance to compare them. And I found that by far and away the most common type of cabochon, little glass object about yay big, features a image of a king or a queen or a god, just the head and shoulders, just the portrait. So that's that idea of portraiture. The head and shoulders portrait is a very European idea. So it's a Europeanized vision of ancient Egypt. So I think their understanding of Egypt was highly superficial. And then the question becomes, why choose to appropriate specific motifs. And I think what they're really looking for is either something that's familiar, like portraiture, or something that's exotic, like a god with an animal head. But that's a whole area I would like to go into a lot more. And you're right, that is something definitely ripe for further research.
My question is to Professor José Salles and Susana Mota. Did the Portuguese regime take any advantage of the news published in 1939 to reinforce the idea of national identity, or to reinforce the existence of similar treasures in Portuguese history?
Good question. What we can say is the Republican regime in that period, all the times that they bring the news about Egypt, they can make a history to understand how the monarchy, how the regime with the king behavior. And in that point, maybe we can tell that the Republic regime in Portugal had an idea against all the regimes with kings, with the monarchs. But in other ways, we can see also some news that are so good to the Egyptians, to the ancient past, that we cannot feel exactly that point in the newspapers. Portugal is a country of newspapers in that period, but some of them have a short life. We have some of them with 1 week only. That means the doctrinary perspective, they don't have time to arrange all the things in time.
Just to add an idea, the Portuguese newspapers of that time was mainly focused on the political issues, of national political issues. So we felt that they were very interested in Tutankhamun, but only to report what was happening in Egypt. Not sometimes they use some ideas as critical aspects. We have a very interesting image used by the newspaper O Século, that it's an image of an assault to a home and a murder. And the figure that was displayed as a knife in the bell, and the legend is that the robber has done to that man and that house the same that Howard Carter and Lord Carnarvon were doing to Tutankhamun's tomb. Sometimes we find critical ideas about this, and sometimes we have news that focus on the aspect that they were profanation of the tomb, but not a link between the national politics and what was happening in Egypt. That what was made was report to the Portuguese people what was happening, not very profound consideration about it.
Our friend from Germany. Thank you. Also a question to the speakers on the Portuguese press. I was pretty much impressed because apparently, contrary to German papers at that time, you had a lot of illustrations in the press, and in Germany that was not the case, and I think in England at that time neither. I think the only things illustrated were advertisements. However, in Germany and in England, for example, we had illustrated magazines, like in London, the Illustrated London News, which was then full of images, or in Germany we had similar journals. But the problem was, I know it for Germany, that it was very expensive to buy the pictures, because we know that the Times had the privilege to publish them. So what they did was to replace a lot of these photos by drawn images. Was there something similar in Portugal?
Yes, we have drones, but we have also images that we can see. They are by the Portuguese newspapers from the international newspapers, and that images come from the news of the agencies of news, and it was very important because this magazine is only about the illustration, ilustração portuguesa. We don't have a good text, we have good images. And these, with the normal texts, normal news that the press published, give an idea to the Portuguese from 100 years ago, what happens in Egypt. And the illustration is very important in this case, yes.
Did they buy original photographs, or did they also redraw things to get around the copyright fees?
We don't have many information about the way they did things, but we have drawings but we have photos also. So we may assume that given the interest in the subject, that they may acquired that image. But we also have one of the things that we have said. Many of the most extended news that were published were not original. So they came from French newspaper, mainly French newspapers, and it's possible that they had copied the images also from the original news that they copied the image and the text. But we have not only, as Professor Salles was saying, Ilustração Portuguesa that was mainly focused on image, really, and we have another one that was not with the same profusion of images, but also have many. And even newspapers, normal newspapers, like Diário de Notícias, for example, they use images that along with the text, and I believe that it was very important to capture the attention. So the newspapers had that in mind, and but also we are talking about newspapers like Diário de Notícias, that is a newspaper that still exists today. It's a big journal, so maybe they were capable of buying that news different from other small newspapers that last for a year or two.
We have the famous Harry Burton photo with the calendar, Lord Carnarvon, Lady Evelyn, and Howard Carter near the tomb. We have that published in the Portuguese press. That means they have some relation, of course, maybe with the time. But we don't have proofs, we don't have any contracts of that kind of business.
So thank you. It's a question also for Jose and Susana Mota. So maybe it doesn't look like a very, very good question, but it's something I saw when I was in Cairo. Sometimes with this kind of report of news happening in other places of the world, we have direct translations of articles in other languages. So I asked myself if some Portuguese newspapers and so on use this method to, I don't know, to inform, because I don't know if there were Portuguese journalists in Egypt in this time. So
no, we have copies from the news that are have published in France and in England. For example, for the French journal Le Matin, Excelsior also. But we have some Portuguese journalists that have made trips to Egypt to see the objects of Tutankhamun's tomb in the Egyptian museum, and they write about it. Okay, that means the impact of the Portuguese press. It's not only to give the idea what happens in Egypt, but stimulate also the study of proto-Egyptologists. We have in 1926 the first translation of the hymn of Athens to Portuguese, not from the original, of course, but the consult, the copy, the translation from the English and French books. And the writer gives all the footnotes about this process. He's a historian, a professor of ancient history of Oporto University, Humberto Pinto de Lima. It was a surprise for us to see in 1926 the first Portuguese translation of the hymn of Athens.
We have time to the lunch. Okay, so I wish you a good day, Herr Uneffer, and see you after lunch.